Welcome, everyone. My name is Catherine Margai, and I have the incredible pleasure of working with the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled at the Library of Congress, or NLS for short. NLS distributes free audiobooks and Braille to those who cannot read a traditional print book because of a disability. Though NLS began in 1931 as a service providing tactile materials for those who are blind, in our 90-plus year history, we have gone on to expand our service to children, those with low vision, and people with physical and reading disabilities. Since then, our collections have grown to include hundreds of thousands of titles in tons of formats, and not just books, but magazines and accessible music materials as well. But today, we want to talk about NLS's special relationship with the audiobook and recorded sound. Because the fact is, it is impossible to separate the story of audiobooks from the National Library Service. In 1934, Congress appropriated funds for NLS to distribute the first ever audiobook materials using a new technology, the long play or LP record. These talking books, as they were aptly known, were created specifically to help people who could not see. In fact, the phrase "solely for the use of the blind" was printed on every early talking book record produced. LP records were eventually adopted widely by the recording industry, and over time, NLS went on to distribute audio materials via cassette tapes, digital cartridges, and now a mobile app available on any smart device, but we still call them talking books. And to this day, our DC office has a state-of-the-art recording studio to continue recording excellent talking books to our ever-growing collection. So, if you've ever listened to an audiobook or an LP record, you can thank the dedicated people who, in the early 20th century, committed themselves to the idea that everyone deserves access to a good book, regardless of ability. With that in mind, I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed panel of narrators to discuss the art of the talking book. Michael Kramer joined the staff at the Library of Congress Talking Book Program in 1993. His narration has received over a dozen AudioFile Magazine Earphones Awards, a Publisher's Weekly Listen Up Award, a Vocal Artist nomination, 2 Stabby Awards, and 2 Audio Publishers Association Audie Awards in 2015, and most recently, in 2022, narrating Brandon Sanderson's fantasy novel, Rhythm of War, along with his wife, Kate Redding. Kimberly Schraff is a veteran of 37 years of book narration and acting on the professional stage. She has performed at numerous theaters in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, and has narrated over 600 audiobooks. Among her favorites are The Shipping News, The Collected Poems of Emily Dickinson, and Savage Beauty. In 2002, Schraff received the Alexander Scourby Award for fiction, honoring her narration of Bee Season by Mila Goldberg. Dawn Ursula came to book narration and voiceover work from a career in theater and on camera. She spent over 20 years portraying a number of incredible characters and has earned 2 Helen Hayes Awards and numerous nominations. Dawn has been with the National Library Service since 2013, and in 2020, she built a professional home recording studio and has been focused on full-time audiobook narration and voiceover work, book production. We're thrilled to have you today, and I'd love to start our discussion by starting at the very beginning. A very fine place to start. When you are working on a new project, how do you prepare? Both preparing the text of the book, but also your voice, your instrument for this kind of long-form narration. Michael, want to kick us off?
Oh, wow. When I first read a book to prepare, what I'm trying to do is remember and capture that experience. So I try to not interrupt myself as much as possible. I'll take a highlighter to highlight words or phrases that I will eventually have to look up, but what I'm really trying to do is remember and or discover the dramatic structure of the piece that I'm working on. And that can be fiction or nonfiction. it's always a story. So what's the structure of this story, and how does it build, and where do you want to turn the page faster? Where do you want to take your time and let it resonate with you? Physically, I think the most important preparation is getting a great night's sleep, because it's not your voice that will go first when you're narrating, it's your concentration. And sleep is probably the biggest thing, both to fix your voice, but also to keep you focused.
Yeah, I concur with everything that Michael said. It really varies with the project. So there's always some sort of research component, and it might be a heavy lift that involves looking up names of places and people, possibly contacting an editor and speaking with an author, or just making sure there's no surprises. In the early days of my book narration career, I read the whole book, page by page, and made notes. And I think that's the ideal, but sometimes when things have to be done on a certain timetable, you streamline that. And I've gotten a little better at streamlining. So I want to first go to an index and see what's coming, and then skim through, even if it's a book of fiction, get a sense of my cast of characters, and make some notes about where those live in my voice, in my body. And that's the first layer of preparation.
How about you, Dawn?
I would say yes. We're all like, oh, my voice. I would say yes to
Wait, narrator?
And add on to it a couple just like technical things. I do keep for every book a pronunciation guide that I use, but also for reviewers who are going to be correcting my work. The word, how it really should be pronounced versus what you might actually hear me do, and where I got the research from, as well as I do like to keep notes as I'm going along and prepping a book, specifically to help me later on if like a character shows up at page 4 and disappears and comes back at page 104. I don't remember what they sound like, but I'll write down the first page that they showed up, the time code, some description about them so I can reference them more quickly later on and go, oh, that's Molly. Yeah, Molly was. Okay. Yeah, that's probably it.
Dawn, I want to come right back to you and start this question really for the panel. What was your most unique voice work you've ever done?
People are laughing. Graphic novel, fantasy, finding your little squirrel very sorry. Being diamond earrings, things like that nature, which I love a lot, and every once in a while. I knew you wanted that.
I had requested the squirrel. Yeah. That was the squirrel.
Yeah. Thank you, Dawn. We were waiting for that one.
In the fantasy realm, I'll just throw a quick story on. I was assigned a sci-fi fantasy book that is not my go-to genre. I'm not a big fan. I respect the genre. But I was asked to do the book, and I thought, let's stretch ourselves. Let's learn to do everything. And I took it on, a very impressive book by C.J. Cherryh. And come to find out, there was an alien language with a glossary, pronunciations that involved vocal clicks and stops, and I had to learn it, and I had to speak it. And all that was great learning, a great experience, until I found out it was the first of about a 12-book series. And so I lived with these aliens, and I spoke their tongue for a very long time.
Yeah, I think the most unique is probably doing the Wheel of Time series written by Robert Jordan. It's about a 15-book series. I think it's close to between 500 and 600 hours. I was a co-narrator on that, but thousands. I had an inch-thick 3-ring binder of characters that you had to keep track of. And this partly goes in the preparation world because that genre challenges you to do voices of dragons and creatures that don't exist, and how do you make a tree talk? How do you make a squirrel talk? I didn't know Dawn at that time. But one of the things I ran into, one of the major characters, as it turned out, and when you're introduced to him, and he had one line, and I thought, oh, well, I know what I'm going to do with that, and then turned the page, and he had a 3-page monologue. And so one of the preparation things, but also one of the things when you're doing a book, is figuring out what choice can I make, and it had to be an extreme choice, but also that I can sustain for 3 pages, and 3 pages is about 6 minutes, which can be, you can spend weeks in those 6 minutes, both as a listener but also as a narrator. So what's the choice that's going to keep the momentum of the story moving forward, still give a hint as to the otherworldliness of this character, and be interesting, and yet you have to be able to sustain it physically yourself. So that's probably the most interesting choice. It's also one of my favorite choices because you kind of just think on that. I'm sure that Dawn went to sleep and just, how am I going to do the squirrel? How am I going to do the squirrel? And then voila, it happened. So.
You raise an interesting question about how genre changes your approach book by book. So I'm curious to have the panel expound on this a little bit. How does your approach change by genre? Kimberly?
You know, I think my physicality changes with the genre, or at least that's an aspect of the change. Certainly my pacing, perhaps my inflection changes with a genre, but there is something about doing a hard-boiled crime procedural that doesn't want erect posture, you know, that invites a little bit of an angle or a slump, and that helps me. It's a cock of the head or a lift of the chin can embody a character or a genre for me, and that's been really interesting to explore. What is the stance of the genre? You can't do too much because you have to maintain a consistent distance from your mouth to the microphone. And you can't be weaving all over the place, but the smallest thrust of a shoulder or caving in of your chest can bring something into the read. So that's my sort of weird answer to how genres differ.
Yeah, to me, the parallel I use is as a musician looks at a score, that's how a narrator looks at print. It's very much the same in that you're taking a visual element and giving it sound. And in the same way that a musician might look at a score to interpret, it's like, well, how do I orchestrate this? Do I need to can I do this with a rock band? Do I do it with a chamber orchestra? Your body is your instrument, and you can choose a whole, wide range of choices with regard to that. Whether, do you need to have 25 character voices, or no, the guard can sound like the guard, the plot is what's moving this. It's not the character differentiation between those minor characters. Just like some pieces of music won't, it's like, we don't need, a piccolo and cannons for this. We just need, 3 violins and a cello. So when I'm looking at, I don't know that I make a genre choice so much as I make a tonal choice for the piece. And that will dictate how extreme I'm going to make a character choice, because you know what, this piece depends on that. That piece, not so much.
I was just gonna, when you first asked the question, and I was just gonna say like tone, pace, musicality are many of the things that will help me. Like if I know what horror feels like, So when I'm gonna read horror, I want that sound to come across, and that's gonna affect all of those things and immediately have the listener go, oh, I kind of know what to expect from this, you know.
You've set us up perfectly for a little bit of an activity, right? To illustrate the ways in which genre impacts the way a narrator approaches the text. So I'm going to have you read something that should sound pretty familiar to those in the audience, but put a genre spin on it. Michael, I'd love for you to read your section as a mystery. Kimberly, as a children's book. And Dawn, I'd love for you to read your section as a romance. Off you go.
There are several emergency exits on this aircraft, forward, aft, and over each wing. Please take a few moments now to locate your nearest exit. In some cases, your nearest exit may be behind you. If we need to evacuate the aircraft, floor-level lighting will guide you towards the exit. Doors can be opened by moving the handle in the direction of the arrow. Each door is equipped with an inflatable slide, which may also be detached and used as a life raft.
Oxygen and the air pressure are always being monitored. In the event of a decompression, an oxygen mask will automatically appear in front of you. To start the flow of oxygen, pull the mask towards you. Place it firmly over your nose and mouth. Secure the elastic band behind your head and breathe normally. Although the bag does not inflate, oxygen is flowing in the mask. If you're traveling with a child or someone who requires assistance, secure your mask first and then assist the other person. Keep your mask on until a uniformed crew member advises you to remove it. In the event of an emergency, please assume the bracing position. Lean forward with your hands on top of your head and elbows against your thighs. Ensure your feet are flat on the floor. A life vest is located in a pouch under your seat or between the armrests. When instructed to do so, open the plastic pouch and remove the vest. Slip it over your head, pass the straps under your waist, and adjust the front. To inflate the vest, pull firmly on the red cord, only when leaving the aircraft. If you need to refill the vest, blow into the mouthpieces. Oh, use the whistle and the light to attract attention. Also, your seat bottom cushion can be used as a flotation device. Pull the cushion from the seat, slip your arms in the straps, and hug your cushion to your chest.
At this time, your portable electronic devices must be set to airplane mode until an announcement is made upon arrival. We remind you that this is a non-smoking flight. Tampering with, disabling, or destroying the smoke detectors located in the lavatories is prohibited by law. You will find this and all the other safety information in the card located in the seat pocket in front of you. We strongly suggest you read it before takeoff. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask one of our crew members. We wish you all an enjoyable flight.
Thank you. Hard pivot. I want to switch gears a little bit here and talk and talk about like the kind of on-the-ground technique of doing what you do. And one of the terms that comes up again and again is the idea of breath control in ensuring a good quality sound recording. So I'm curious if you could explain what breath control is and how you use it. Kimberly, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think it's critical. I think it's not the first thing you grasp in the technique of reading an audiobook. I think I'm not going to say mastery, but my ease with breath took a decade. But one of the reasons why it's so important is that it relaxes you. If the narrator is not relaxed, it'll be the first poker tell for the listener. A tension in the voice, a ragged breath or an irregular breath, first and foremost says to me, this is effortful for the reader. And so that's an impediment to the listener. And it takes a long time to get past that daunting microphone that looms in front of your face and that is your primary listener when you're in the booth reading a book. So breath control, if you can breathe into your belly and not a shallow breath into your upper chest, sorry, microphone, that first and foremost for me allows ease. And that's a big hurdle to scale for a new narrator.
Oh, okay. Breath to me it functions three different things that breath does. One, breath is the scaffolding that holds the ideas together as they're being constructed. There's a whole theory that as an actor, basically what you're doing is learning how to breathe as the character. And the third thing is that breath is the medium. It's the thing that carries the ideas. And what does that mean? When we tend to speak in ideas. And the breath is what carries that. And as a narrator, you're looking at words on the page, and if you breathe in the middle of an idea, that idea is like an arch, and you just put up the stones, took a breath, and all those stones fell down. And now you got to quickly put the rest of those stones together, and somehow the listener has got to make sense of what they just heard. Because on the page, it's an arch. What it should be is an arch, but if the listener doesn't have the page, what you did was basically put 3 stones up, they fell down, and now you've got this thing lying there. So that's part of the importance of breath control. Breath control in the sense that, yeah, you have all of this wealth of material that you can carry on that breath. And that, I think, is what Kim is talking about in terms of the relaxation that allows you to take that deep breath, to take that idea. Because sometimes that idea is the whole paragraph. And where you breathe in that paragraph will release tension, and when you choose not to breathe, then you're also increasing the tension. And that can be very important, especially when you get into the excitement of something going on. And so oftentimes you'll actually edit out the breaths because you want that tension to be there. If you follow this in terms of here, if you watch it on the stage, you're holding your breath with me, aren't you? You're waiting for me to say that next thing. That's how you follow a narration. That creates a tension for the listener. That creates dynamic emotion for the listener. That releases the tension for the listener. And those things are all part of breath control. You can't do it if you only have, 6 syllables worth of breath in your pipes, so to speak. So the more you can expand that, and that takes relaxation, the more effective you can be, the more choices that you have in terms of how you're actually communicating, because it's not just the words, it's the punctuation that's also communicating an idea.
We do it instinctively. Yeah. We rarely stop and wonder if we have enough breath to get through the next sentence. I watched you talk,
right,
and I never saw a huge intake of air, because we just flow it. It pumps up as we need it. And that's the kind of ease that the narrator aspires to. Suddenly, it gets hard when you step in the booth. I don't know why, but it kind of does.
No, part of it is because you're making that translation from the visual image and visual medium to an oral medium. And so, in a way, print has gone the other way. Print tries to capture the oral and give it a visual image, and you're doing the opposite with that. And the eye apprehends differently than the ear does. That's one of the challenges of narration, is that oral narration, oral apprehension is linear. Your ear can't skip ahead. It has to go with everything as it goes. Your eye can scan a whole page. Your eye sees, the commission that was detailed by this act of Congress. You see that word, those sets of words, and all of a sudden your eye says, okay, that's A. I know what that is. You see those same 6 words, you automatically know. You're skipping. You're already to the verb. What's the verb? What's the action? What are they doing? But your mouth still has to say all those syllables.
But you raise an interesting point, Michael, in translating the text of the page into a more audio experience. Kimberly, I actually wanted to direct a question at you, thinking about a quintessential kind of text to narration conundrum, or question rather. When you are looking at a text with multiple characters, often when they're in conversation, within a matter of sentences, back and forth conversation, how do you form those characters and switch into them, embody them in the matter of seconds?
To hearken back to the breath, the simplest way that I would say it is that on an inhale, you take in the character, and on an exhalation of speech, you release the character's voice. So it becomes a dance of, I have this idea of the character in my mind, I breathe in the mom, and as I exhale, she speaks. She might speak for half a page, and then I breathe in her kid, and he's a little bit different, but that inhale lets me shift a little bit and breathe out a 9-year-old. So breath is part of it, but it's a dance. And it's usually weaving in and out of not just voices, but third person, he said, she said, narrative connective tissue. And it is a challenge, but it's the fun. It's the fun dance of narration, is surfing dialogue.
It's funny you call this a dance. So you've actually prepared a piece of narration that I would call a tap dance, right? A selection from Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Over to you.
That the Miss Lucases and the Miss Bennets should meet to talk over a ball was absolutely necessary, and the morning after the assembly brought the former to Longbourn to hear and to communicate. "You began the evening well, Charlotte," said Mrs. Bennet with civil self-command to Miss Lucas. "You were Mr. Bingley's first choice." "Yes, but he seemed to like his second better." "Oh, you mean Jane, I suppose, because he danced with her twice. To be sure, that did seem as if he admired her. Indeed, I rather believe he did. But, however, it may all come to nothing, you know. My overhearings were more to the purpose than yours, Eliza," said Charlotte. "Mr. Darcy is not so well worth listening to as his friend, is he? Poor Eliza, to be only just tolerable. I beg you would not put it into Lizzie's head to be vexed by Mr. Darcy's ill treatment, for he is such a disagreeable man that it would be quite a misfortune to be liked by him. Mrs. Long told me last night that he sat close to her for half an hour without once opening his lips." "Are you quite sure, ma'am? Is not there a little mistake?" said Jane. "I certainly saw Mr. Darcy speaking to her. Miss Bingley told me that he never speaks much unless among his intimate acquaintances. With them he is remarkably agreeable." "I do not believe a word of it, my dear. If he had not been so very agreeable, he would have talked to Mrs. Long. But I can guess how it was. Everybody says that he is eat up with pride. I do not mind his not talking to Mrs. Long, said Miss Lucas, but I wish he had danced with Eliza. Another time, Lizzie, said her mother. I would not dance with him if I were you. I believe, ma'am, I may safely promise you never to dance with him. One cannot wonder, said Miss Lucas, that so very fine a young man with family, fortune, everything in his favor, should think highly of himself. If I may so express it, he has a right to be proud. That is very true, replied Elizabeth, and I could easily forgive his pride if he had not mortified mine. Pride, observed Mary, who piqued herself upon the solidity of her reflections, is a very common feeling, I believe. By all that I have ever read, I am convinced that there are very few of us who do not cherish a feeling of self-complacency on the score of some quality or other, real or imaginary. If I were as rich as Mr. Darcy, cried a young Lucas, who came with his sisters, I should not care how proud I was. I would keep a pack of foxhounds and drink a bottle of wine every day. And if I were to see you do it, said Mrs. Bennet, I should take away your bottle directly.
Thank you. Michael, I'd love to turn to you and hear your thoughts on the role that pacing plays in effective storytelling.
Well, pacing is again part of the breath control. It's how to me it's one of the most important things in the story. There's the content and then there's the pacing, and the two weave together, become make the emotional content of the piece much more effective. I guess, yeah. I'm looking for where this piece here. Okay, yeah.
Excellent.
Yep.
Please, start us out. So this is a sample
Yeah.
from The Wizard of Oz by L.
Yes.
Frank Baum.
Uncle Henry never laughed. He worked hard from morning till night and did not know what joy was. He was gray also, from his long beard to his rough boots, and he looked stern and solemn and rarely spoke. It was Toto that made Dorothy laugh and saved her from growing as gray as her other surroundings. Toto was not gray. He was a little black dog with long, silky hair and small black eyes that twinkled merrily on either side of his funny, wee nose. Toto played all day long, and Dorothy played with him and loved him dearly. Today, however, they were not playing. Uncle Henry sat upon the doorstep and looked anxiously at the sky, which was even grayer than usual. Dorothy stood in the door with Toto in her arms and looked at the sky, too. Aunt Em was washing the dishes. Far to the north, they heard a low wail of the wind, and Uncle Henry and Dorothy could see where the long grass bowed in waves before the coming storm. There now came a sharp whistling in the air from the south, and as they turned their eyes that way, they saw ripples in the grass coming from that direction also. Suddenly, Uncle Henry stood up. "There's a cyclone coming, Em," he called to his wife. "I'll go look after the stock." Then he ran toward the sheds where the cows and horses were kept. Aunt Em dropped her work and came to the door. One glance told her of the danger close at hand. "Quick, Dorothy!" she screamed. "Run for the cellar!" Toto jumped out of Dorothy's arms and hid under the bed, and the girls started to get him. Aunt Em, badly frightened, threw open the trap door in the floor and climbed down the ladder into the small dark hole. Dorothy caught Toto at last and started to follow her aunt. When she was halfway across the room, there came a great shriek from the wind, and the house shook so hard that she lost her footing and sat down suddenly upon the floor. Then a strange thing happened. The house whirled around 2 or 3 times and rose slowly through the air. Dorothy felt as if she were going up in a balloon. The north and south winds met where the house stood and made it the exact center of the cyclone. In the middle of a cyclone, the air is generally still, but the great pressure of the wind on every side of the house raised it up higher and higher until it was at the very top of the cyclone. And there it remained and was carried miles and miles away as easily as you could carry a feather. It was very dark, and the wind howled horribly around her, but Dorothy found she was riding quite easily. After the first few whirls around and one other time when the house tipped badly, she felt as if she were being rocked gently like a baby in a cradle. Toto did not like it. He ran about the room, now here, now there, barking loudly. But Dorothy sat quite still on the floor and waited to see what would happen. Once Toto got too near the open trap door and fell in, and at first the little girl thought she had lost him. But soon she saw one of his ears sticking up through the hole, for the strong pressure of the air was keeping him up so that he could not fall. She crept to the hole, caught Toto by the ear, and dragged him into the room again, afterward closing the trap door so that no more accidents could happen. Hour after hour passed away, and slowly Dorothy got over her fright. But she felt quite lonely, and the wind shrieked so loudly all about her that she nearly became deaf. At first she had wondered if she would be dashed to pieces when the house fell again, but as the hours passed and nothing terrible happened, she stopped worrying and resolved to wait calmly and see what the future would bring. At last, she crawled over the swaying floor to her bed and lay down upon it, and Toto followed and lay down beside her. In spite of the swaying of the house and the wailing of the wind, Dorothy soon closed her eyes and fell fast asleep.
Dawn, I'd love to turn to you and hear your thoughts on this. You know, there's something to be said about pairing the right narrator with the right book. I'm curious, have you ever started narrating a book and just not found a way in or not been able to connect to a character?
Yes. There have been times when, luckily, I've found out ahead of time where I've scanned before and been able to tell, I'm not the right one for this, and not start the project. There was once where I did start it because I thought I was going to love this book. It was historical nonfiction. I was really interested in the subject matter, but I did not connect with the author's style. And I didn't know my boss was going to be here for the story. She is, so she's going to hear. But she came to me and she said, Dawn, I think you need to start the book again. I listened to it and you sound bored. And she was right. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I will, help me. And one of the ways that she said, try this, and it worked. And I loved it and I've used it ever since. She said, pretend you're the author. You wrote this. You're passionate about this. You spent who knows how long researching all of this. You got it to publication and wrote 300 pages worth. Own it. Love it like it's yours and read as if it's your work. That was it. Wow. That was it. It was amazing. Thanks.
She's smart. She's smart.
I'm good what she does. There are times, though, and I'm thinking about the segue into my piece.
Please.
There are times, though, when I have turned down books and where I feel like a narrator should say, no, I'm not the one for this. Sometimes it's genre, connection. I'm also an advocate for knowing when you do not identify with something very important in the book in which another narrator will be better. I'm using code, but I think you know where I'm going. It's not my race, it's not my culture. There's things going on in this that somebody else's direct connection, understanding is going to be a stronger, more important, better for the listener, better for the author voice. And the piece that I'm getting ready, without spoiling it, but just in case they can't tell, the piece that I'm getting ready to read from is about two, in this scene at least, two black women who are passing for white women. And yet this story is so specifically from the African American culture. The whole story needs someone who understands or has a connection to the delicate nuances of what's happening in this story.
I totally agree. So to that end, please, so you've prepared a reading from Nella Larsen's Passing.
Suddenly, her small fright increased. Her neighbor had risen and was coming towards her. What was going to happen now? "Pardon me," the woman said pleasantly, "but I think I know you." Her slightly husky voice held a dubious note. Looking up at her, Irene's suspicions and fears vanished. There was no mistaking the friendliness of that smile or resisting its charm. Instantly, she surrendered to it and smiled, too, as she said, "I'm afraid you're mistaken." "Why, of course I know you," the other exclaimed. "Don't tell me you're not Irene Westover. Or do they still call you Reenie?" In the brief second before her answer, Irene tried vainly to recall where and when this woman could have known her. There in Chicago, and before her marriage, that was plain. High school? College? YWCA committees? High school, most likely. What white girls had she known well enough to have been familiarly addressed as Reenie by them? The woman before her didn't fit her memory of any of them. Who was she? "Yes, I'm Irene Westover. And though nobody calls me Reenie anymore, it's good to hear the name again. And you?" She hesitated, ashamed that she could not remember, and hoping that the sentence would be finished for her. "Don't you know me? Not really, Reenie." "I'm sorry, but just at the minute I can't seem to place you." Irene studied the lovely creature standing beside her for some clue to her identity. Who could she be? Where and when had they met? And through her perplexity, there came the thought that the trick which her memory had played her was for some reason more gratifying than disappointing to her old acquaintance, that she didn't mind not being recognized. And two, Irene felt that she was just about to remember her, for about the woman was some quality, an intangible something, too vague to define, too remote to seize, but which was, to Irene Redfield, very familiar. And that voice. Surely she'd heard those husky tones somewhere before. Perhaps before time, contact, or something had been at them, making them into a voice remotely suggesting England? Could it have been in Europe that they had met? Reenie, no. "Perhaps," Irene began, "you..." The woman laughed, a lovely laugh. A small sequence of notes that was like a trill, and also like the ringing of a delicate bell fashioned of a precious metal, a tinkling. Irene drew a quick, sharp breath. "Claire!" she exclaimed. "Not really Claire Kendry?"
This has been just an incredible conversation. I want to thank you all so much for your time and lending your expertise to us. Thank you all for joining us today. If you or someone you know would be eligible for the National Library Service and would like to know more, please visit loc.gov/NLS or call 1-888-NLS-READ. This session also marks the end of the programming on the PopLit stage. So I'm so excited to close us out. Thank you so much for coming to the National Book Festival in person. If there are sessions that you missed today, please tune back into loc.gov over the coming days and weeks to watch the sessions that you missed. But thank you so much. We're so glad to have you here, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Cheers.